My husband left me a note with one word on it. Just one word. And by the time I figured out what it meant, my bank accounts were frozen, my house was being taken, and the man I had spent 9 years loving had completely vanished off the face of the earth. No calls, no text, no explanation. It was gone. And I want you to really sit with that for a second. Not the debt, not the legal nightmare that followed, but the silence. The specific, suffocating silence of someone you built your entire life around just not being there anymore. Because that silence, that was the thing that almost broke me. Not almost, did break me. And then I put myself back together, piece by piece. Alone. With a 4-year-old daughter and $400 in my bank account, and a dog who kept looking at the front door waiting for someone who wasn't coming back. And then 3 years later, he came back. And what he told me on my porch in the rain that night, I was not prepared for. Nobody could have been prepared for it. Stay with me. Because this story doesn't go where you think it's going. My name is Claire Mercer, 34 years old, Austin, Texas. And this is the story of how I lost everything, rebuilt it from nothing, and then had to make the hardest decision of my life standing at my own front door at 10 o'clock on a rainy November night. I met Daniel when I was 23. Costco parking lot. His cart had rolled into my car in the parking lot and he was so genuinely, almost comically horrified about it that I ended up being the one reassuring him. We exchanged numbers for insurance. He texted me that night, first to check on the car, then 30 seconds later he sent a second text that said, "Also, I looked you up on Instagram. Would it be weird if I asked you to dinner?" I said yes to dinner. 6 years later I said yes at the altar. And I want you to understand who Daniel was. Before everything. Because I think it's easy to hear a story like this and immediately make him the villain and close the file on him, and I'm not going to let you do that yet. Because it's not that simple and you deserve the full version. Daniel was the kind of man who remembered everything. Every small thing you mentioned in passing. A restaurant you said you wanted to try 3 months ago, a book you said your mom recommended, a song you heard in a grocery store and couldn't remember the name of. He'd just show up with those things. Quietly. Without making it a whole production. He was present. Genuinely, physically, emotionally present in a way I hadn't experienced before. When I talked he listened like what I was saying was the most interesting thing that had happened to him all day. When I was upset he didn't try to fix it immediately. He'd just sit with me in it until I was ready to move. He was my favorite person on earth. And he had a business. Logistics and supply chain. I won't pretend I fully understood the details. What I knew was that he had built it from scratch, that it was successful, that he worked incredibly hard, and that I trusted him completely to handle it. That trust was the thing that mattered later. We had a house. A good neighborhood in Austin. Not flashy, Daniel wasn't flashy, but beautiful, warm hours. We had Rosie, who arrived 4 years into our marriage and immediately became the center of everything. We had date nights and Sunday pancakes and inside jokes and a dog named Biscuit who destroyed 2 of my shoes and one of Daniel's belts, and we loved him anyway because he had a face that made consequences impossible. We were happy. I need you to understand that we were genuinely, honestly, completely happy. Because that's the only way to understand what losing it felt like. The signs, and I call them signs now only because I know what came after, started about 8 months before everything fell apart. Daniel got quieter. Not dramatically. Just a little slower to laugh. Sometimes I'd look over at dinner and he'd be somewhere else entirely, staring at nothing. I'd say, "Hey," and he'd shake it off and smile and say, "Just tired." I thought he was overworking. Said so. He said he was fine. He started taking more calls outside. Walking to the backyard, voice low. I didn't think of fair. Daniel was not. I genuinely don't believe Daniel was capable of that. I thought there was a business situation he was handling and didn't want to worry me about. So I didn't push. That was my mistake. Not because I should have suspected something dark. But because if I had pushed, if I had just sat him down and said, "Daniel, I need you to actually talk to me," maybe things would have gone differently. Maybe. 2 months before everything. He sat me down after Rosie was in bed and said, "Claire, I need you to know that no matter what happens, everything I do is because I love you and Rosie more than anything." I said, "That's a weird thing to say out of nowhere." He laughed. It didn't reach his eyes. I said, "I love you too, weirdo." And I kissed him and we watched TV and I went to sleep. 6 weeks later he was gone. The Tuesday morning. I've relived it more times than I can count. I woke up and Daniel wasn't in bed. Not unusual, he was always up early. I came downstairs, the coffee maker was running. A mug was already set out for me. He'd done that before he left. Set out my mug. Like muscle memory. Like love doesn't just stop even when everything else does. There was a note on the counter. One word. I'm sorry. I read it 4 times. Told myself it was about something small. I texted him, you okay? Called, rang and rang. Made coffee. Got Rosie up. Got her to school. Came home. Called again. Voicemail. By noon I was panicking. By 3 I was calling hospitals. By 5, when Rosie's school called to say pickup was past due and I had completely forgotten, I knew. The calls started the next morning. First one from a number I didn't recognize. A man who said he was a creditor looking for Daniel Mercer regarding an outstanding balance. I said, I'm sorry, what balance? He gave me a number. I asked him to repeat it. He did. $4.3 million. I sat down on my kitchen floor. Over the next 72 hours I learned things about my husband's business, about my husband's life, that I had no idea about. The company had been collapsing for almost 2 years. A major contract had fallen through. Then another. Loans had been taken against assets I didn't know were being used as collateral. Investors had pulled out. There had been legal disputes. And there had been a business partner. Before I tell you what those 3 years looked like, drop your city in the comments right now. I want to know where my people are watching from tonight. Atlanta, Houston, Seattle, Phoenix. Drop it down there, I read every single one. And if you found this video today and you're new here, this is the kind of story we tell on this channel. Real. Messy. Doesn't wrap up in a bow. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next because trust me, it gets a whole lot more complicated before it gets better. I did not sleep the first week. I mean that completely literally. I would lie in bed and my brain would just run. The numbers, the calls, the lawyers I couldn't afford explaining things I couldn't understand, the calls from Daniel's family who were furious and confused and somehow partially blaming me, the calls from people I thought were friends who stopped calling very quickly once the word debt started going around. You find out who people are fast when you stop being someone they want to be associated with. My mom came from Phoenix the second week. Slept on my couch for 2 months. She is the reason Rosie and I survived that period. Full stop. She would take Rosie in the morning so I could be on the phone with lawyers. She would make dinner when I forgot that dinner needed to happen. She would sit across from me at 10 o'clock at night when Rosie was down and just be there while I fell apart. I don't have words for what that kind of presence means when everything else is gone. I really don't. The hardest moment of that entire first stretch, and there were a lot of hard moments so this is saying something, was about 3 weeks in. Rosie and I were eating lunch. She was eating her sandwich. Normal 4-year-old Tuesday afternoon. And she looked up at me with those eyes that are so much like his it still catches me sometimes and she said, Mommy, where's Daddy? And I said, Daddy had to go away for a while, baby. And she looked at me for a second and then she just nodded and went back to her sandwich. And I went to the laundry room and sat on the floor next to the dryer and cried as quietly as I've ever cried in my life. It wasn't even the question that got me. It was the acceptance. The way she just nodded and went back to eating. Like at 4 years old she had already learned that the people you love don't always stay. That sometimes they just go away and you nod and you keep eating your sandwich. That was the moment I made myself a promise. Whatever happened, however this unraveled, Rosie was not going to grow up believing that she wasn't enough to make people stay. I was going to make absolutely sure of that. Whatever it cost me. The house went. Not right away. There were months of fighting, lawyers, negotiations. But eventually, yes. Rosie and I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment about 12 minutes from her school. Clean. A little porch where Biscuit could sit in the mornings. Rosie called her room the cozy room because I told her small rooms are cozier and she believed me and I will cherish that forever. I went back to work full-time. Added Saturday hours. Picked up a second client base. I'm a physical therapist. Good at it, always have been. And that was the one thing nobody could take. Whatever else was gone, I still had that. But I want to tell you about the nights. Because I think stories like this skip the nights and go straight to the rebuilding montage, and that's not honest. There were nights after Rosie was asleep where I sat at my kitchen table and stared at nothing. Not crying. Just empty. That specific kind of exhaustion that isn't physical. The kind that comes from holding yourself together in front of a child all day while your life is being reconstructed from rubble. There were nights I was so angry at Daniel I scared myself. Not the productive kind of angry. The kind that has nowhere to go. The kind you just have to sit inside of until it burns itself out. And there were nights, and this is the part one find hardest to say out loud, there were nights I missed him so much it felt physical. Like an ache in an actual location in my body. And that was the most disorienting feeling of all. 'Cause how do you miss someone who did this to you? How do you still love someone who left you one word and $4 million of someone else's mess? I don't have a clean answer. I just know both things were true at the same time. Every day for a long time. I filed for divorce after 8 months. Not because I wanted to. Because my lawyer told me it was the smartest legal protection I could give myself and Rosie. Because staying legally married to someone who had vanished left me exposed in ways that weren't fair to us. Daniel never responded. He was served through public notice, last known addresses, the whole bureaucratic nightmare. He didn't contest anything. Didn't appear. Didn't send a single word. The divorce went through. And his silence was. It was like trying to grieve someone who wasn't dead. Mourning without a funeral. The worst kind of loss because there's no ceremony for it. No casseroles from neighbors. No one sitting with you. Just a slow hollow space where a person used to be. Time kept moving. The way it always does whether you're ready or not. Rosie turned 5. Then 6. She started kindergarten and cried for exactly 2 days and then decided she loved it completely and never looked back. She is so much braver than me it's almost funny. I paid off the first chunk of the legal debt. The piece that had been specifically assigned to me, 14 months after it all started. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot after making that payment and cried. The good kind. The grateful, overwhelmed kind. Because 14 months earlier I genuinely was not sure I was going to be able to do it. I started running. Not because I enjoy it, I hate running, it is objectively terrible, but because I needed something that was purely mine. Just me and Miles and nobody needing anything from me for 30 minutes. Got better. Not in a single moment. Not a dramatic turning point. Just a slow, quiet accumulation of okay days until okay became normal and normal started feeling like something close to good. I went on a few dates. Carefully, awkwardly, not very successfully. I was guarded in ways I hadn't been before, and the men I went out with could feel it, and I could feel them feeling it. That was fine. I wasn't looking for anything serious. I was just practicing being a person again. My life was rebuilding. And then it was 3 years later. November. That weird Austin November cold. Not like real cold, but enough that the nights feel heavy and the air smells different. Rosie was asleep. I was on the couch with Biscuit, who is ancient now, gray around the muzzle, basically a decorative pillow with a heartbeat, watching something I couldn't tell you the name of now. Someone knocked on my door. 9:30, maybe 10 o'clock. I almost didn't answer. I'm a woman alone with a kid. I don't open doors to late knocks from unknown people. But something made me get up. I looked through the peephole. And every single thing inside me stopped. Daniel. He looked wrecked. That's the only word I have. 3 years of whatever he'd been through had happened directly to his face. Thinner. Eyes hollowed out. Hair longer than I'd ever seen it. He was soaking wet. It had started raining while I was inside. And he was just standing there with his hands at his sides. Not knocking again. Like he'd spent everything he had just getting to the door, and now he was waiting to see what I would do. I stood at that peephole for a long time. Every feeling I had spent 3 years carefully sorting and containing and organizing inside myself came apart at once. The rage. The grief. The love I had never been fully able to extinguish no matter how many good logical reasons I gave myself. All of it. Simultaneously. Like a dam giving way. Open the door. I still don't entirely know why. I think because I needed to see him with my actual eyes. Not in the space he occupied in my head. The real version. Standing on my porch in the rain looking like every decision he'd ever made had followed him here. I said, "You have about 30 seconds to tell me why you're here before I close this door." He said, "I know I don't have the right to be standing here. I know there is nothing I can say that fixes anything. I just need you to know what actually happened. I need you to hear it from me. And then I'll go wherever you want me to go." I looked at him. I said, "You're not coming inside." He said, "Okay." Got my coat. Came back. Sat in one of the porch chairs. "Talk," I said. And he did. For 2 hours in the rain and then on the porch steps. Daniel told me everything. Marcus Webb. The business partner he'd brought in to save the company when things started going wrong. Marcus had seemed completely legitimate. References, track record, connections. What Daniel didn't know, what took him a long time and a lot of the wrong kind of help to figure out, was that Marcus Webb was running a sophisticated fraud operation. Had done it at other companies before Daniel's. Specifically targeted businesses in crisis because desperate owners don't ask enough questions. Marcus had been pulling money out for almost a year before Daniel fully understood what was happening. When Daniel understood, when he finally saw the whole picture, he went to a lawyer immediately. And the lawyer told him something that changed everything. The way Marcus had restructured the business, the documents he had manipulated over 18 months, Daniel was exposed. On paper, in the records that existed, it looked like Daniel had been involved. Not because he had done anything wrong, but because Marcus had built it to look that way. Deliberately. As insurance, Daniel was terrified. Not for himself. He told me this and I believed him. I believed him because it's the most Daniel thing imaginable. He was terrified for me and Rosie. He had gone to a lawyer who told him that if he stayed, if he was visibly present and connected to us when this unraveled, it could pull us into the investigation in ways that would make things worse for me legally. So he ran. Not to escape. To protect us. I need to be honest about how I received this. My first reaction was not understanding. My first reaction was white-hot fury. I said, "You don't get to make that decision for me, Daniel." "I know," he said. "You left me. With a 4-year-old. And $4 million. And a note with one word. Because you decided alone, in your head, that it was better for me. I know how it sounds. It sounds insane. Sounds like the most arrogant thing you've ever done. You took away my choice. You decided what I could handle without asking me." "Yes," he said quietly. "It was." I stood up. Walked to the edge of the porch. Stood there. "Do you know what Rosie did when I told her you went away?" Said. She nodded. She just nodded and went back to her sandwich. She was 4 years old and she just accepted it. Like she'd already learned not to be surprised when people leave. That landed. I watched it land on him. His face did something I hadn't seen before. Just gave way completely. He didn't cry. He was somewhere past that kind of crying. He just collapsed inward. Like a structure losing its load-bearing wall. He said, "I'm sorry. There is no version of sorry that is the right size for this. I know that." I stood there. Then I sat back down. "Tell me the rest," I said. "After. Where you were. All of it." He spent the first year working with federal investigators. Quietly. Building the case against Marcus Webb from a distance, because being in Austin, visibly connected to me and Rosie, would have complicated things. He had cooperated fully with everything. Marcus Webb had been arrested 14 months after Daniel left Austin. Convicted on 17 counts, wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering. Currently serving 11 years in federal prison. The investigation had cleared Daniel completely. No charges. No findings. Just a man who had been catastrophically deceived and then made a catastrophically wrong choice about what to do about it. The second year he had spent rebuilding enough stability that coming back meant something. That he wasn't arriving with nothing and no way to do anything. The third year he had spent trying to find the courage. "I drove to Austin 4 times, he said. "Sat outside your building. Couldn't get out of the car." I looked at him. "How did you know where I live?" "I always knew where you were." I didn't know how to feel about that. Part of me was furious. Part of me, and I'm not proud of how much this meant to me. Part of me felt something release. He had always known where we were. He had chosen to stay away. Had believed, wrongly, infuriatingly, in a way I will probably be working through for years, that it was the right thing. But he had known. He said, "I'm not here to ask you to take me back. I know I don't deserve that conversation. I just needed you to know the truth. And I needed to ask, if there is any world in which I could be in Rosie's life." There it was. The real thing underneath everything else. I sat with it for a long time. Because here is the truth about Rosie and her father that I hadn't told anyone. She had been asking more lately. 7 is old enough to understand that other kids have dads who pick them up and show up to things. She had been asking questions I didn't have good answers to. I said, "I need you to understand something." "Okay." "What you did, running instead of staying and fighting it with me, was wrong. Not because the fear wasn't real. Because it wasn't your decision to make alone. I was your wife. I deserve to be part of that choice. You took that from me." "Yes, I did. And everything I built in these 3 years, that is mine. I did that. You don't get to come back and be part of something I built without acknowledging what it cost me to build it." "I know. And Rosie is not a given. That will be her decision as she gets older. Not yours. Not mine. Hers. You understand that?" "Yes. But..." I stopped. felt the weight of what I was about to say. I will not be the thing standing between her and her father if her father is actually, genuinely, consistently here. He looked up. You don't get to disappear again, I said. Ever. For any reason. If something goes wrong, you pick up the phone and you call me. We deal with things together or we don't deal with them at all. That is not negotiable. Understood. I'm not promising you anything else. I don't know what this is. I'm not your wife. I don't know what I am. But Rosie deserves the chance to know you, if you can be someone worth knowing. He said, I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to be that. I stood up. He stood up. We stood on that porch in the quiet after rain. I said, find somewhere to sleep tonight. Text me tomorrow. We'll talk about next steps. Claire. Good night, Daniel. I went inside, closed the door, stood with my back against it in the dark hallway and pressed my hands over my mouth and let myself feel everything, absolutely everything, for exactly 5 minutes. Then I heard Biscuit snoring from the couch. And something about that completely ordinary, completely unbothered sound, made me almost laugh. I went and sat next to the dog. And I thought about what my mom said to me maybe 2 years into the rebuilding. One of the hard nights when I called her late and she could hear it in my voice before I said a word. She said, Claire, you don't have to have it figured out tonight. Tonight you just have to get to tomorrow. That's what I did. That Tuesday. And every day after it. Just get to tomorrow. That was 4 months ago. Daniel and Rosie have seen each other 6 times. The first few with my mom or my friend Jana nearby. Not hiding it, just present. The last 2, just the 2 of them. Last week they went to the park for an hour. Rosie came home and looked at me very seriously and said, Daddy is funny but he's really bad at the monkey bars. I almost spit out my coffee. I don't know what Daniel and I are. I'm genuinely not in a hurry to figure it out. What I know is that I am not who I was 4 years ago. I'm harder in places and softer in others. I trust differently. I look at bank statements now. I ask questions I used to wave off. But I also rebuilt a life from $400 and a 1-word note. And that life is mine in a way nothing I had before ever was, because I built it myself, with my own hands, while keeping a small human fed and loved and confident enough to critique her father's upper body strength on their first real outing. That's not nothing. That is actually everything. Now I want to hear from you. If you were standing at that door, would you have opened it? And if someone came back after 3 years with a real explanation, not an excuse, an actual explanation, does that change anything? Is there a version of that story where it's enough? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know where you land. I've been sitting with these questions myself for 4 months and I still don't have clean answers. Also, did Daniel do the right thing by leaving? Or did he do what was easiest for him and call it sacrifice? That one keeps me up at night, honestly. Tell me what you think. Subscribe if you're not already here. This community asks the real questions and I need that in my life. I'll be reading every comment tonight. I'll see you in the next one.